At Mom's birthday banquet, my brother toasted her and said, "At least one of us became worth raising." Dad laughed and pointed at me, not him. The table chuckled until my sister slid me a sealed envelope and whispered, "Open it in front of them." Nobody ate after that. My name is Ethan Briggs. I am 36 years old. I am a senior forensic analyst at Wexler & Cross, a mid-size accounting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I own my apartment outright. Bought it 4 years ago. No cosigner, no help, no debt except a graduate school loan I have been paying down since the year I left my father's orbit for good. Forensic accounting is not what most people picture when they hear the word accountant. I do not prepare tax returns. I do not manage payroll. What I do is trace money that was moved to hide something. I find what was transferred, when, and, more importantly, why the timing of that transfer tells a different story than the one the sender intended. My colleague Simone Reyes knows this better than most. She has been at Wexler & Cross for 9 years, and she processes every incoming call that comes through the firm's general line. On a Tuesday afternoon in October, she transferred one to my desk with a note that said, "Some retired accountant's old files, routine cross-reference, but the firm name is your dad's." That was 8 months before the birthday banquet. I remember picking up the phone. I remember the date, because it was the same day I had closed a case involving a family business dispute in Raleigh. A father, 2 sons, money moved through an LLC without documentation. I remember thinking, as I reached for the receiver, that I was very tired of that particular story. I did not know yet that I was in it. My father, Walt Briggs, has had a leather portfolio since before I could drive. Dark brown, brass clasp, his initials embossed in the bottom right corner. He brings it to every family business conversation, has since before I can remember. Whenever it appeared on a table, something was being decided. I grew up understanding that the portfolio meant the room was shifting into a different register, that what came next would be presented as final. He had it with him at the banquet, on the table to his right, next to his bread plate. I had brought mine too. My father built Briggs Supply Solutions out of a single warehouse in Greensboro in 1988. By the time I was old enough to understand what the business was, it had 3 locations, 12 full-time employees, and a reputation in the regional construction supply market that my father maintained with the same careful, total attention he gave to everything he considered his. I was included in that category. So was my brother Holt. So was my sister Frances. The difference was in how that inclusion worked in practice. When I was 19, my father sat me down at the kitchen table and told me I was going to work at Briggs Supply Solutions after college. Not asked. Told, he used the word future as if it were a location he had already selected and furnished. He said the business needed both his sons, and that he had planned accordingly. My mother Vivian sat at the counter and did not look up from what she was doing. I did not argue that day. I was 19, and I did not yet know how to hold a position in a room my father was also occupying. I argued at 24. By then I had a degree in accounting, 2 internships, and a job offer from a firm in Charlotte that did exactly the kind of work I wanted to do. I called my father on a Sunday evening and told him I was taking it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I see." Then the call ended. He did not speak to me for 6 weeks after that. Not a message, not a missed call. 6 weeks of nothing, and then he called on a Saturday like the silence had not happened, and asked if I was coming home for Thanksgiving. I came home, I sat at the table. I passed the dishes. I watched my father watch Holt the way he had always watched Holt, with the particular attention of someone observing an investment performing well. That was the shape of things for 12 years. Christmas 2021, my father gave Holt a truck, new black full package. He told me over the phone a week later that it had been a rough year for the business and he hoped I understood. I said, of course. I had spent that same week reviewing the financials of 3 companies with genuinely rough years. I knew what that looked like in the numbers. What my father described did not match. I filed that detail somewhere and did not examine it. There was a photo album on the credenza at the restaurant that night. My mother has made one for each of her children every year since I can remember. A single page per birthday, a photo from that year, sometimes a note in her handwriting. Francis had shown it to me when we arrived. Holt's most recent page was on top. His 41st birthday. The four of them at dinner somewhere. Everyone smiling. My pages stopped at 24. No note in my mother's handwriting. No photo. Just the year printed in her careful block letters, and then nothing after. I did not mention it to anyone. I looked at it for a moment, and then I went to find my seat. The private room at Hendricks holds 45. My mother had invited 41, which meant every chair was filled, and the serving staff had to turn sideways in the narrow space between the window tables and the main arrangement. The room smelled like candles and the specific kind of expensive floral arrangement my mother only allows at birthdays and Christmas. Vivian Briggs, 61 years old, sat at the head of the table in a blue dress she had bought specifically for this dinner. She was happy, genuinely, visibly happy in the way she only gets in rooms full of her people, when the event has come together the way she planned it, when the food is right and the lighting is right and everyone she loves is in one place. I watched her from my seat and thought, she does not know. Holt rose with his glass at 8:47. I remember the time because I had been watching the clock, not anxiously, just noting it. He waited for the room to settle, which it did quickly, because Holt has always known how to command attention. He is broad, easy, good-looking in the way that benefits from confidence and a good tailor. And he has been the face of Briggs Supply Solutions long enough that he moves through a room like he owns whatever room he is in. He cleared his throat. He smiled at my mother. He said, I want to say something tonight about what it meant to grow up in this family, about what it means to be raised by a woman who gave everything she had to make sure her children had what they needed. He paused. He said, at least one of us became worth raising. The room responded. Not everyone. Uncle Reg, my mother's brother, did not laugh. Francis did not, but enough people did, the way people laugh when they sense they are supposed to, and the person who made the joke is someone they want to be on the right side of. My father Walt laughed. He pointed at me across the table, index finger extended. Easy and certain. He said, not him. The table chuckled. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. Francis's hand was already flat on the table. She had positioned the envelope before Holt stood up. I had watched her do it from the corner of my eye. She slid it across to me without looking up. She leaned in and whispered, open it in front of them. I broke the tape. The first page was the LLC restructuring document, filed November 2019. Briggs Supply Solutions, LLC, member interests. Holt Briggs, 60%. Walter Briggs, 40%. The line where my name had been was not blank. It had been removed entirely. The document had been prepared cleanly, filed correctly, and signed by my father and my brother in front of a notary in Greensboro. I set the first page face up on the table. The second and third pages were the transfer records, 11 transactions across 6 years, the largest a single transfer of $140,000 in March 2020. I had traced all 11. I knew each date, each amount, each account it moved from and into. Seeing them in print on the paper my sister had assembled was different from seeing them in my own documentation. Quieter. More final. I set those pages face up on the fourth page was the capital injection confirmation, $340,000, transferred to an account in Holt Briggs's name, documented as a business development investment with no repayment schedule attached. No repayment schedule. I had flagged that to Donna Marsh the first week. She had flagged it to the court. I set that page on top of the others. My mother said, Ethan, what is that? I did not answer her. I looked at my father. Uncle Reg said, Walt, is this true? My father's hand moved toward his wine glass. It stopped halfway. Stayed there. Holt looked at his plate. That one look. The look my father had sent across the table toward Holt in the first half second after I set the pages down, before he composed himself. I had seen it before. In deposition rooms. The fast inventory, who knew this was coming, what did they say, where is the exposure? He was not looking at Holt with anger. He was looking at him the way a man looks at a cosigner when the bank calls. Holt did not look back. My father said, "This isn't the place for this." Uncle Reg said again, "Quieter, Walt. Is this true?" My father said, "Reginald, we handle family matters as a family." Not at dinner. I gathered the pages. I slid them back into the envelope. I set the envelope in front of my mother, at the head of the table, centered in front of her bread plate. She had asked what it was. She deserved to know. She would read it when she was ready, or Frances would sit with her and walk her through it, but either way it would not leave this room with my father. Frances was watching Holt. He had not looked up from his plate since the third page went down. I pushed my chair back. I said, "Finish dinner. I'll be in the anteroom off the hall when anyone is ready to talk. I have water, and I'm not in a hurry." I picked up my portfolio and walked out of the room. Behind me, I heard my mother say something I could not make out. Nobody followed immediately. I walked down the carpeted hallway, found the anteroom, a small room with 4 chairs and a round table, used for private conversations the restaurant charged extra to reserve. I sat down. I set my portfolio on the table. I poured water from the pitcher on the sideboard. I looked out the window at the parking lot. 41 people in that room. Most of them had just watched my father point at me and say, "Not him." I was thinking about Tuesday afternoons. 8 months earlier, Simone transferred the call at 2:14 on a Tuesday. The man on the line introduced himself as a junior associate at Phelps and Garrett, an accounting firm in Greensboro. He said they had recently absorbed the client files of a retired senior partner named Harold Ostrowski. Routine intake process. Some of Ostrowski's older files required cross-referencing with outside firms on shared client histories. He was calling because one of Ostrowski's long-standing clients, Briggs Supply Solutions, had a relationship flag in their system connecting to Wexler and Cross. He said it was routine. He said he just needed to confirm the nature of any historical engagement. I said, "Give me 1 moment." I put him on hold. I walked to Simone's desk. I asked her to log the call with a timestamp and note that I had taken it personally. She did not ask why. She has worked with me long enough to understand what it means when I ask for a timestamp. I went back to my office. I told the man at Phelps and Garrett that Wexler and Cross had no historical engagement with Briggs Supply Solutions, but that I appreciated the call and would flag it for our records. He thanked me. We ended the call. I sat at my desk for 40 minutes. Harold Ostrowski had been my father's accountant since 1994. I had met him twice, once at a company event when I was 12, once at Christmas dinner in 2009. The last year I came home for the holiday. He was a careful, methodical man. He had handled my father's business finances for 27 years. He had retired in 2021. His files had passed to Phelps and Garrett in standard succession. His successor had made a routine cross-reference call to a forensic accounting firm that happened to employ Walt Briggs's younger son. My father had trusted the same accountant for 3 decades. When that accountant retired, he trusted the process. He did not think to ask whether the process could reach me. I opened a new file on my computer. I started with what I already had access to: public LLC filings, state business records, the corporate registry database. The restructuring showed up in the first 20 minutes, November 2019. Briggs Supply Solutions, my name removed. Holt's interest increased. I had not known about this filing. I had not been notified. I had not signed anything. I noted the date. 22 days after the Sunday evening call, where I told my father I was taking the Charlotte job. I noted that too. Over the next 11 days, working before office hours and after, I traced every financial movement I could document. 11 transactions. 6 years. $418,000 total. Each transfer timed to a business event, a contract renewal, a location expansion, a vehicle purchase that appeared on the business's depreciation schedule but registered to a personal address in Holt's name. I listed them in a spreadsheet in chronological order. Date, amount, source account. Destination. Elapsed time since the last family event I had attended. It was not inheritance. It was not generosity. It was a receipt. 12 years of receipts, documenting what my brother had earned by staying and what I had forfeited by leaving. I called Donna Marsh the following week. Donna Marsh is a business litigation attorney. She has handled LLC disputes, improper distribution cases, and conflict of interest filings for 14 years. I had referred 2 clients to her from Wexler and Cross, and she had referred 2 back to me. We are not friends. We are professionals who trust each other's work. She reviewed my documentation in a 2-hour meeting at her office. She asked 12 questions. I answered all 12. She asked for copies of everything. I gave her what I had. She said she would need 3 weeks to complete her own review before she could advise on filing. She called me in 18 days. She said, the conflict of interest in the original LLC filing is documentable. Ostrowski prepared the restructuring documents for a transaction that directly benefited one client relationship at the expense of another, without disclosure or independent review. The $340,000 capital injection to your brother has no repayment schedule, no loan documentation, and no board resolution authorizing it as a gift. It exists in a legal gray space. We can file on both grounds. I said file. She filed 3 weeks before the birthday banquet. My father did not know. I know he did not know because 3 days before the dinner, he called me. Tuesday evening, just after 7. He said he was checking in. He asked how Charlotte was treating me. He asked if I was keeping busy. Standard calls, the kind he had made every 4 to 6 weeks since the silence ended after I took the job. Maintenance calls that said, I am still your father. Things are still normal between us. I said Charlotte was good. I said work was steady. I asked how the business was doing. He said, good, growing. Then he said, are you doing okay? You doing all right? I said yes. He paused. That pause. I had heard its shape before, in deposition rooms at the end of difficult calls, in the silence after a question someone has asked, and immediately regretted. It is the sound of a person deciding whether to keep going with a plan they are no longer certain about. He said, good. That's good to hear. We said goodbye. He hung up. 20 minutes later, Frances called. She said, Dad called me tonight. Asked if everything was okay with me. Asked if I had talked to you lately. I said, same call. Same script. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Ethan, I found the documents, the ones in the estate folder in Mom's office. I said, I know. Another pause. Longer, she said. How long have you known? I said, 8 months. She said, and you put them there, in Mom's office, for me to find. I said yes. I had not wanted her to hear it from me directly. Had not wanted her to feel she was being pulled into my case. I had put the copies in the estate folder because Frances had been helping my mother organize paperwork since January, and I knew she would find them, and I knew what she would do when she did. She said, what do you need me to do? I said, bring the envelope to the banquet. Sit next to me. When the moment is right, you'll know. She said, okay. That was 3 days before the dinner. In the Anna room, Frances found me 20 minutes after I had left the table. She sat down across from me. She did not say anything for a moment. She poured herself a glass of water. She said, you could have filed and never told any of us. You could have let the court process run and just waited for it to land. You came to this dinner for Mom. I did not answer right away. She was right. She was right in a way I did not entirely want to examine, because examining it would require me to admit that I had spent 8 months treating this as a professional exercise, and somewhere along the way it had become something else. I had filed documents. I had built a case. I had been systematic and careful and precise. And then I had driven 4 hours to sit at my mother's birthday dinner and watch her enjoy an evening before the evening ended. I had brought the portfolio for my father. I had sat at that table for Vivian. I could not fully explain why that distinction mattered to me. It just did. Frances said she didn't know about any of it. I want you to know that. I went through everything in that office, every file, every folder. She knew Holt was more involved in the business. She did not know the numbers. I said, I believe you. She said, she's going to ask you to explain it to her. I said, I know. We sat for a moment with that. I walked Frances through the filing the way I would walk a client through it. Methodically, without editorializing. The original LLC restructuring used Harold Ostrowski, who had been my father's accountant since 1994. Ostrowski prepared the documents as a favor, the way he had prepared documents for my father for 27 years. He did not flag the conflict of interest, the fact that he was removing a named member from a business structure without that member's knowledge or consent, because he had been operating within my father's trust for so long that he had stopped treating my father's instructions as transactions requiring independent review. When Ostrowski retired, his files passed to Phelps and Garrett. His successor, doing a standard intake cross-reference, made one routine call to Wexler and Cross. My father had not considered that possibility. He had trusted a 30-year relationship and forgotten that relationships end and files continue. I said to Frances, he trusted the same accountant for 3 decades. When that accountant retired, he trusted the process. He forgot that I was the process. She looked at me for a moment. She said, Donna found something else. I said, the repayment schedule. She said, there isn't one. I said, I know. That was in the original filing. Donna Marsh had flagged it in her review, the $340. 000 capital injection to Holt had no loan documentation, no promissory note, no board resolution classifying it as a gift or a bonus. It existed in the business records as a transfer. Under the LLC operating agreement, the original operating agreement before the 2019 restructuring, a transfer of that size without documentation and without distribution to all members was an improper distribution. Holt had received $340,000 that, legally, could not be fully accounted for as anything other than a distribution from which I had been excluded. Donna had filed on both the restructuring conflict and the improper distribution. I said to Frances, when the family comes in, I am going to give Dad the cover page of the filing. That is all I am going to give him tonight. He will understand what it means. Everything else happens through Donna. Frances said, Holt is going to try to say it was a loan. I said, Donna already looked for the documentation. There isn't any. He can say whatever he wants. Outside the anteroom door, I heard footsteps in the hall. They came in stages. Uncle Reg first, my mother's brother, 58 years old. A retired high school principal from Asheboro who had no stake in Briggs Supply Solutions and no reason to align with anyone in the room except the truth. He sat down in the chair nearest the door and folded his hands on the table and did not speak. My mother next, with Frances holding the door. Vivian sat beside Reg. She had the envelope in her hands. She had read it. I could tell from the way she was holding it, carefully, like something fragile she had not decided what to do with yet. Holt stood in the doorway for a moment before he came in. He chose the seat farthest from me. My father came in last. Walt Briggs, 63 years old, walked into the anteroom the way he walked into every room, like he had reserved it. He looked at the chairs, chose the one across from me, and sat down. He set his portfolio on the table to his right. Habit. He looked at mine. Same size, same dark leather. Different initials in the bottom right corner. It had been on the table when he walked in, and he had not looked at it until he sat down. And then he had looked at it for a long moment before he looked at me. He said, "What happened tonight was..." I set the document on the table. 1 page. The cover sheet of the civil filing. Briggs v. Briggs, LLC dispute. Improper distribution. Conflict of interest. Filed in Guilford County 3 weeks prior. Donna Marsh's name and firm address at the bottom. My father stopped mid-sentence. He read the header. He read it again. His hand, the one that had been moving toward the wine glass at the dinner table and had stopped halfway, was resting on the table now. It did not move. Holt leaned forward to read it. He got to his own name, listed as a respondent, and he sat back. My father said, "This isn't the place for this." I said, "You picked the place." The room was quiet. Holt said, "That money was a loan. It was always a loan. We just hadn't gotten around to the paperwork." I said, "Donna Marsh already requested the documentation. The promissory note, the repayment schedule, any written acknowledgement between you and Dad that it was a loan. She received nothing, because there is nothing. You can characterize it however you want in conversation. In the filing, it is an undocumented transfer of $340,000 from a business account to a member who held 60% interest in a company where another named member, myself, was removed from the operating agreement without notification or compensation." Holt looked at my father. My father did not look at Holt. "Uncle Reg," said Walt, "I asked you at the table if this was true." "My father," said Reginald, "I have been building this business for 35 years, and I made decisions about its future that were mine to make." Reg said, "Decisions about your son's share of it weren't yours to make alone. That's the whole point of a documented agreement." My mother had not spoken. She was looking at my father with an expression I did not have a name for. Not anger, not surprise. Something slower and more complicated. The expression of a woman recalculating a long sequence of events she had understood differently until 20 minutes ago. My father turned to me. He said, quietly, "I just needed to know you'd be fine on your own." I looked at him. I had prepared for many versions of this conversation. I had prepared for denial, for deflection, for the process argument. I had not fully prepared for that sentence. The confession that framed 35 years of preference and 6 years of financial exclusion as a test of his definition of parenting. That he had taken $418,000 from what should have been a shared inheritance and given it to my brother, and removed my name from the company structure because he wanted to see if I could make it without him, and had decided, somewhere in that logic, that this was a thing a father did. I said, "I am. That's the problem for you." I did not raise my voice once. My father picked up his portfolio and set it in his lap and looked at the table. Holt said nothing after that. Uncle Reg looked at me across the table and gave one small nod. My mother said, "Ethan, I didn't know about the numbers." I said, "I know, Mom," Frances told me. She said, "I didn't know." I said, "I believe you." The room held that for a moment. I said, "Everything else goes through Donna Marsh. Her information is on the cover page. I'm going to head out. It's a 4-hour drive, and I want to be home before midnight." I stood up. I put my portfolio under my arm. I said, "Happy birthday, Mom." I walked out. Holt called 4 days later, not to apologize. He called to negotiate. His voice had the particular quality of a man who has spent 4 days convincing himself that the situation is still manageable, that there is still a version of this that ends without public documentation, without a Guilford County filing that anyone who knows the family can access. He said, "Look, can we talk about whether this needs to go the way it's going?" I said, "Call Donna Marsh. Her number is on the cover page." He said, "Ethan." I said, "Holt. Call Donna." I hung up. He did not call back. Frances called me the following week. She said my mother had called her upset. Not at me. She was clear about that. Upset in the way someone is upset when they have spent a long time inside a story and have discovered that the story was not the one they thought they were in. Frances told her everything, not to hurt her and not to build a case. Frances has spent 38 years managing the information flow in our family, deciding what to share, what to soften, who needed to know what and when. She had decided she was done with that. She sat with my mother for 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon and told her the whole sequence: the LLC filing, the transfers, the capital injection, the cross-reference call, the counterfiling, the envelope. She told me my mother listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said, "I want to call him." Frances said she did not try to talk her out of it. I do not know what was said in that call. My mother has not told me, and I have not asked. What I know is that my father did not attend Christmas that year, and that my mother sent me a card in January with a handwritten note that said, "I should have asked more questions. I'm sorry I didn't. I keep it in my desk at work." Uncle Reg called me a week after the banquet. He said only, "Your grandfather would have done the same thing. He built something too, and he made sure every one of his children knew exactly where they stood. Said it was the only honest thing you could do for someone." I thanked him. It was the only moment in the whole sequence, the 8 months of tracing, the filing, the dinner, the drive home, where my composure cost me something. I sat in my car in the parking garage after that call, and I did not move for about 10 minutes. I had not known my grandfather felt that way. I had not known until a man who attended 41 family events alongside him decided to call me the week after a birthday dinner and tell me. 10 minutes. Then I went back to work. 14 months later, the LLC dispute settled. $190,000 deposited into an account in my name, documented as a settlement disbursement in the civil case record. Not everything. My attorney had estimated the full claim could reach $240,000 with interest and legal costs. But settlements are not math. They are decisions made by people who want the process to end. I wanted the process to end. My father wanted the process to end. We ended it. It is public record. Anyone who looks up Briggs v. Briggs in Guilford County can find it. I used $40,000 to pay off the remainder of my graduate school loan. The first time in 12 years I have had no debt of any kind. The rest sits in a separate account that I have not touched and am not in a hurry to touch. Briggs Supply Solutions still operates. Holt still runs it. The original LLC structure had to be unwound as part of the settlement process, simplified, redocumented, reviewed by an independent accountant. Smaller now, in the sense that the legal clarity it always should have had makes it look less impressive than the version that existed on paper when money was moving without documentation. My father did not attend Christmas or Easter. He and my mother are still married. She has not left. I have not asked her to consider it, because that is not my decision and was never my decision to make. The photo album on my mother's credenza has a new page. My 36th birthday. Frances had taken a picture of me in Charlotte on a Sunday morning. Coffee in hand, parking garage behind me, the unglamorous, ordinary reality of a day off. She had sent it to my mother without telling me. My mother had printed it and added it to the album without being asked, in the space after the year printed in her careful block letters, between the page that stopped at 24 and whatever comes next. I know this because Frances sent me a picture of the album page. I looked at it for a long time. I did not call my father. I called Frances. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. The next one is already on the way.